This is Tracy Hales Vast with Right on Four Corners. Today I'm talking to Chloe Rachel Gallaway about her memoir, The Soulful Child, 12 Years in the Wilderness. Hi, Chloe.
Hi, thanks for having me on today. I'm really excited to talk to you and your listeners.
And I'm excited to have read your book and to be able to talk to you. It was quite a memoir.
Yes, I've heard. I'd love to know your reflections on the other side of reading it. Yeah.
It was kind of a hybrid with including poetry as well as the prose, and I really enjoyed that.
That is my style of writing, is that I like to weave narrative with poetry and prose. And I think a lot of that comes from my roots and my connection to my father,
Yes.
who you gathered was a storyteller through music, really.
Right.
But he passed that down to me. I think you could feel that in the story, right? That he passed that down to me, and I have carried it through in the form of writing.
Yes, it's very poetic. So how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, as long as it took me to become a writer. So
Okay.
that's my answer to that. In a nutshell, it was 8 years from the day I started until the day I finished.
Wow.
And I say the reason it was 8 years is because it was a very formative 8 years of my life, in which it was a priority for me to really own my voice and become the writer I needed to be to do my story justice. And I started out with the process of writing with a lot of blocks, a lot of mindset blocks, writer's block, as many writers are somewhat aware of, I feel like, with writer's block. But for me, writer's block has a lot more to do with the emotions and the resistance that comes from our inability to process our own story to then step into our full expression as a writer. And that's much of what I discovered in my journey of writing my memoir, which was very emotional, right?
Yes.
It was, you read it, and there was a lot. In almost every memoir, there is a lot of emotion, I feel like. But,
I think so.
Right? That's
If you really want to tell the truth, I think so.
Yes, if you want to tell the truth. And that's a whole topic in itself about telling the truth, right?
Yes.
We could talk about that.
So you're saying that in writing your memoir is how you learned to be a writer. So you weren't a writer before this?
No, I think that I was a writer. I wrote a lot of poetry. As you read in high school, I was writing poetry. The issue is a mindset issue that I did not consider myself a writer. And I did not believe that I was a writer. And I had a lot of hang-ups thinking that to be a writer meant certain things.
Right.
Like maybe it meant to be published. Well, if we're not yet published and we're a writer,
right?
If we put that expectation on ourselves that we're not a writer because we're not published? And listen, I'm not the only one that does this, I believe.
I think you're right.
There's a lot of us that put expectations out there, and so that expectation creates the block and the barrier for us, right?
Right.
And that's a lot of what my work has moved into as a writing coach, is really understanding the mindset and the blocks and the barriers that prevent us from seeing and being connected to the writer that is already within us.
I agree. So you have retreats and workshops to teach writers or to help writers find their voice. Is that right?
Yes. My work is that I help people write full-length books, and I also have a collection that I do. It's a series, and we produce one. Myself and my publisher do one book a year that has 10 authors in it for voices, and so that's a collection that we do that is primarily to help people find their voice and tell a particular story called Your Braving It All story. And
Oh,
it's right now it's for women, and I feel very connected to women, being one,
yeah.
and being a woman that I feel has really gone through a Braving It All story in the last 10 years to become a writer and to write my memoir and to become a writing coach. And so within that 10-year frame, there is a big story of Braving It All. And I found that many women have this Braving It All story. I'm guessing that you have one also.
Absolutely. It's part of living these days.
It is, right? And if
Yes.
you want to if you want to, speak your truth and write your truth, I think it's part of that. It's part of becoming your true self.
Right.
It's part of being authentic. There's not enough to say about that in the world of writing, wouldn't you say, as
Right.
a writer?
Yes, absolutely. Your book was fascinating. And as you said, it contains a lot of emotion and everything else. Just for our audience's sake, give us a real quick synopsis of the book.
Well, this is the true story of my growing up in the wilderness from birth to age 12. My mother gave birth to 6 children in the wild, as you read about, and my father was the leader in this whole revolutionary lifestyle. My parents were very much a part of society. My father was on the verge of fame as a musician during the counterculture movement. He and my mother met in San Francisco in 1968. So he was really at the height of the pinnacle of a starting career for him as a musician. And my mother was a ballet dancer from Houston. And they really chose anything but
Right.
the normal trajectory of what their lives would have been to educated people with many opportunities in a worldly sense for success. And we see in the story that they chose anything but that and chose to raise a family in the wilderness. And the story follows that whole upbringing of my life, being raised in nature and the connectedness with spirits and animals, horses in particular that my father loved so deeply, and we trained a lot of wild horses off the reservation. But it also entails the struggles of living in isolation and the breaking apart of my family through the death of my brother and many traumas and losses, right? I don't think we're meant to live in isolation as human beings.
Right. You had the family, and in your book you capture the wonder and the beauty of it as well as the tragedy of it.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's our work as storytellers to really see things from all sides possible.
Right.
And of course, that seeing is going to be filtered through our own perception. And that's what makes the difference in a book, is what is the lens through which the writer is writing it. For me, owning my story and writing it, getting it down on paper to share, was a way to really see the gift of my childhood. And so that's the lens through which I wrote it, in which you saw and experienced the connectedness, the nature, even the goodness that I saw in my father at times was heavily flawed.
But your love for him really comes through. It must be difficult to find, as you call it, the lens with which to write it, because you could have written volumes about this, but you became very focused in the story. Was that difficult to find that lens?
Wow. Definitely a challenge. I think that was part of the reason for taking my time with it, was to find the lens. And I think I say that we write our stories through the lens of who we are and who we are becoming.
I think so.
In the writing of a book, we are starting at a certain place with ourselves, and we are also becoming, which is the magic.
It is.
Truly, of writing your story, right? Is that you are becoming, and where are you going, and who are you becoming in that, right? So for me, the writing of my story was a spiritual journey.
Yes.
My father was still alive. I was in a deep need of understanding him better. I wanted to know him. I had a sense that he was going to die. That sense of urgency that my father's going to die. I spent many years of my life, separated from him because I went into foster care at age 12. Though I saw him, it was a broken relationship.
Right.
So, I went through many years of the struggle, and I know there's many of you out there that can identify with this very thing, of being in a struggled relationship with your mother or your father or someone that you love. So for me, that assisted me to dig really deep for my truth around this relationship with my father. And that's why you got to see it from all sides.
So when you wrote the memoir, were you writing just for yourself at first, or were you intending on publication?
No, I was intending on publication. Now, I had been dreaming about writing my book since I was in my early 20s, but because I had that mindset block of I'm not a writer,
right,
and also the emotional wounds of my past were all very affront in my body and in my heart and mind, right?
Right.
I had left my life in the wilderness at 12 in a very traumatic way, and was in survival mode, really. Started school at 12 years old. I'm not going to say that was easy.
Right, I can imagine.
You read that. It was
yes.
kind of funny for me. There was some humor and there was some lightness in being able to travel back to write about being 12 and starting school at a primarily all Hispanic school, and I'm a white kid.
Right.
And that was a little rough in many ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
A big transition, but there was a lightness in it, being able to go back to it and already have overcome it and gone through it. Right?
I bet, yes. Well, I like the way that you didn't start school at 12 years old completely ignorant. I mean, you had been taught to read, and you were obviously, and you and your brothers were very intelligent and knew.
Yes.
So it wasn't like you were ignorant. You had some education. Your parents were educated, so that helped.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a huge piece in the learning of that for myself and for others in the world, in that there are many ways to be educated.
Right.
And so I say I started formal schooling in the sense that we understand in society.
Right.
But what we learned from my story is that I was very educated.
Yes.
In an experiential manner, and the problem-solving skills and the critical thinking skills and the confidence in being in your own body,
right,
and being strong and being decisive and being able to make decisions, which are vitally important things for us to have a successful life, right?
Right.
Those were all things that I got from my early years of being raised on the land, of being riding on horseback and being literally connected to the earth, barefoot on the earth much of the time, planting in the soil, climbing in the trees, being a part of seasons.
Right.
Being a part of the fall when it comes in and feeling it and being in this visceral experience of it is an education.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful education, right? So I think that's something that's very important for me, and was important for me to reveal in the story, is that there are many, many types of being educated. There are many ways of being educated.
Yes. Chloe, this would be a good time for you to read a little bit from your memoir for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just gonna read in different places in the book. It's a testament to the writing coach that we should be able to open up story and share from different parts of the story, and that page alone or that paragraph alone connect to our reader.
Right, I agree.
And that's what I like to teach my writers, is like being present on the page in every single moment is really our work as writers. And then there's a whole fluidity, right, of like how do we capture the whole story and how do we weave it together. But
yes,
no matter what, we have to we have to hold the big picture of the story, and then we have to dive into it, right?
Right.
So,
yep.
So let me read this caption that I love so much because it really speaks to how I feel about my siblings, and the six of us. And I say, I call us the pack. So
Right.
we were a pack.
Yes.
We played with the sun at our backs, the tree branches reaching out to us, the golden earth spinning with shades of green. We played until dusk, where it all faded. The orange ball of fire on the horizon sunk slowly. We were a pack, my siblings and I, living on the edge. Literally on the edge of an 8,000-foot mountain range. Coyote called us into the night. We were a pack, the six of us. When the sun went down, we laid down our played-out bodies, fast asleep to a world of dreams. We woke at first sunlight, the golden lines of the sun streaming through the cabin windows. Every day was new and vibrant. The same colors of the earth were spinning around us, but our hearts were a tiny bit changed by growth, by love, and by fear. Mountain lion, bobcat, deer, and coyote roamed the woods. We roamed the woods too, looking for adventure, feeling the soul rise up to meet the mind.
I love that part.
I really, by nature, am more of an introvert, and I love being alone, and I love sitting and writing and being in nature. That is just where I feel my greatest, most authentic self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, do you feel that way as a writer
I
as
do.
well?
Yes. That really describes it perfectly.
And I bet you, many of our listeners out there that are writers, I bet you all feel this way.
I bet. I think so.
So, but the other side of publishing your work, right, is to
Yes.
expand yourself.
Right.
And to be able to meet people and connect with your readers. And so this whole thing about speaking is something I think worth stepping up to.
I agree.
And being a part of. So I would love to read a little bit more for you.
Please.
That kind of gives some context to our reader.
Great.
A place called home. The sun settled in the sky behind the dual-wheeled flatbed truck, red with blue trim around the edges. The back of the flatbed had a large steel bumper frame that was painted in black and red, writing on it, Jesus Saves. My father had painted the bumper himself. He had known of a certain God in his youth, and now he was forced to reconcile his beliefs, finding his true connection to Holy Spirit through Jesus. He was coming to know Jesus as he was becoming his own man. His mentors were alive and present in him, Emerson, Thoreau, and Jesus Christ. My father felt as Emerson did when he wrote that Jesus Christ belonged to the true race of prophets. He saw with an open eye the mystery of the soul. My father would not call himself a prophet, but whether he knew it or not, he lived his life in this way too. We drove over the last hill and the engine revved, the sound vibrating through the truck bed, my small body bouncing up and down. My siblings and I were packed in the back of the truck bed, Nye, Carrie, and me on one side, and John on the other. All of our belongings were packed around us, clothes and bedding in bags, dishes, and a few small furniture pieces. In the middle of all the material things were 3 goats riding along with us. Gives you a nice picture,
It
doesn't
does.
it?
Yes. Very clear picture.
And I tell you, those goats were really something special for me.
Yeah, you describe how in the book how you'd become so personable with the goats and your horses too.
Yes. I mean, and much of that teaching came from my father, that animals operate off of energy and that we do have this connected relationship with them. And, you know, the early part of the book where I described coming up on that bear, and I was 6 or 7 years old, I think, and I had a moment of panic where I thought, oh, I'm facing a bear. I was alone in the woods, and I had that moment where naturally a person would panic, and then the lessons of my father were so ingrained in me already at 6 or 7, and I remembered him saying, you know, the animals are only afraid when we're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They operate off of energy. So I knew that I needed to just step into my power in that moment and show up in honesty. It was like, if I could just get to the most honest place right now in my body with this bear, then this bear is going to get me. That was such a gift to be given that as a child.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading that. I was afraid for this little girl facing this bear, but then you had such control of the situation and your mind and knew it that no harm came to you. It was like an understanding with the bear.
Yes, and I long for our society to have that.
I agree.
You know, any of these parts of my story that can bring a person to that understanding is part of my purpose. It's part of my living purpose, I believe.
Talk for a minute about your being an intuitive writing coach. And did you discover that gift in yourself as you were writing the memoir?
I did. I did, absolutely. Because originally I was taking writing classes and memoir classes in particular. I took 4 years of memoir classes at the University of New Mexico. And I had already taken some creative writing classes at the University of New Mexico and through some other workshop type things. You know, I went to the Taos Writers Conference that happens in Taos every year. I was doing a lot of different types of programs for writing. And the focus really was so much on the craft, right? So understanding the elements of craft, you know, your point of view, your thematic driving forces and story, your writing scene and exposition, and so all these elements of craft, but there was in all of this process, by the way, I feel like it's approaching the writing from a headspace. So, you know, I'm diving into my memory, I'm trying to remember what's happened, and then I'm trying to apply these craft tools to my story, and it was very challenging. I don't want to say it did help me. I don't want to say it was unhelpful. It did help me in many ways understanding the craft, but only from a headspace.
Exactly.
And so what I found about a third of the way through the book, where I was constantly challenged by not fully being able to express myself or find a rhythm or a flow in the writing, was that we're missing the heart space. And we're missing the actual intuitive space, which is down in our gut. And I realized this because the more I was writing and the more I was feeling blocked, which meant I was only writing a little bit at a time. And geez, you think 8 years is a lot. It could have taken me 20 years to write this book. And I went through this connection process where I was going back up the mountain to my father during the writing, and I was just sitting in the woods of my childhood. And it was underneath a tree in the middle of the woods where I wrote my best writing. Just like that. It was like, no. It was just like I wrote it, and there it was.
Wow.
And it was an epiphany for me. I was like, oh, there's this whole thing of when I am really grounded in my body and I'm really connected to my gut and to my heart, my voice is actually coming from my root chakra, moving all the way up through my body and out of my voice box. It's not coming from my head. So that realization was huge for me in my own writing process. And then as I continued to take writing courses and I studied under some really known people, which was helpful again, by the way. So I don't want to discredit any of my experience or anyone else that has been in my experience, because I am grateful for all of my learning. But I did realize that this whole heart space and the intuitive space was missing. And wow, was that profoundly powerful for telling story? And was it profoundly powerful for me to recognize within myself that that was there? And it was something that came from my childhood. That became my program. That became the thing that was lit on fire for me. Are you kidding me? I went from thinking I couldn't even tell my story, I couldn't even write a book, to I'm writing this book, I'm publishing this book, and not only that, I'm going to lead other writers.
Yes.
I'm doing this.
That's great.
And that happened all over a few years of time. That
Nice.
I stepped into all of that. And now I've been a writing coach for over 6 years. So I'm heavily in the process of helping people write books, of helping them deal with the mindset issues that we come in with, of helping them to understand that they've got to get in the heart space and in the intuitive space. And they've got to understand that their story is in their whole body,
Yes.
in the whole body, right? And self-expression comes from really getting into your whole body. That's why, dance and movement and all these things that help us get in our body. Hey, climbing a tree, being on a horse, all these things that I'm so familiar with, right?
Yes.
They're really, really helpful if you incorporate that into the self-expression. So that's what we do in my retreats. I mean, we don't have a horse in the room with you per se at my retreat. but if I could, and maybe that's a big dream for me, is that I'm going to have horses that are going to be in there with us. But
could be.
That's part of the process, is that we lead our retreats and we really host them at these beautiful settings. They're oftentimes ranches or, places that are very out in nature. They're beautiful because we want people to feel nourished, so they're often beautiful places. But they're very private and they're very much in nature, and it's a whole experience for our writers where they get to completely disconnect from the world. They come into this environment. We provide this all organic chef-prepared meals that are actually created by my brother, Nye. So you read about Nye in the book, right?
Yep.
And how Nye was a miracle because he got run over accidentally, and in most cases, I think he would have died. Nye he really is a miracle, and he is a miracle worker with food, and he actually grows a lot of the food that we provide at the retreat. People who have read the book, they read about him, and then they come to the retreat, and we're both there working together. So it's a very special thing.
That is. So your website where people can find information about your retreats is ChloeRachelGallaway.com. And you spell Gallaway Gallaway.
It's pretty inclusive, my site. If you go on there, you can read about my book. You can read about my retreats and my book writing programs. And I'm always open to connecting with new people and, connecting people to the process and helping them really create a vision and a dream, telling their story from beginning to end. And I even connect them with publishing because it's challenging, I think, this day and age to connect with publishers. And there's several different ways to get published these days,
Yes.
But it's invaluable to have somebody on your team and have support from editing to publishing and even to marketing. It's an entire process. I could close with a little piece that I really love.
Okay.
It's later in the book, To Feel on Their Way Out.
Great.
So this is called The Animal Whisperer. The concrete jungle was no place for a beating heart to feel. I walked these streets by day and night, now a part of the world. I drove my SUV in high traffic with the constant motion and sound of civilization booming. It was the opposite of the blooming plants of my youth that took their time to grow freely in the sun as they reached for the sky. Here, everything moved quickly, and you felt the need to keep up with it. I was stopped at a red light in the crisp winter air, wanting to get through my window. I rolled down the window to breathe in the air and heard the loud pounding of someone's rap music jarring my ears. I rolled the window back up and cut my own radio off that was playing Willie Nelson's Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain. I thought about it. In the world, people were so sheltered. They rarely felt the rain. They had umbrellas to keep them dry, coats and hats to protect the skin. They rode around in cars and trucks tucked into their own bunker of protection, cutting off connection from the air, the earth, and one another. I thought of my father and how he'd spent 35 years alone in the woods. He had always been very close with the animals, but now they were all he had. He and Juniper were the best of friends. Remember that a horse can live up to be 40 if well cared for. Red lights were where I'd wait in my car and gave me time to reflect. And often in these moments, I think of my father and Juniper riding through the backcountry with no red lights. I'll leave it there for you guys.
Okay. And that was Chloe Gallaway, the author of the memoir, The Soulful Child, 12 Years in the Wilderness. This is Tracy Hales Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.